It was the human year 2026 when the Kareshna decided to invade to take over the planet. The insectoid species thought it would be a simple victory and a quick lunch, as 7 billion personnel on the planet made for a very highly nutritious and sustainable food source. The inhabitants of the planet, known now as human, fought back with everything they had, yet they could not, for some reason, break through the chitinous outer shell of the insectoid species ships. Some of the greatest weapons that they threw at them were absolutely worthless. At least, they thought it was at first. What we know now as conventional weapons had a limited effect. They might crack the outer shell. They might be able to puncture a hole, and maybe that's about it. But nothing the insectoid race's ships could not heal from over a short period of time. However, it wasn't until they got on the planet and faced the personnel that they realized the humans have a strange addiction or strange love affair, as they would put it. As the insectoid species ravaged across the planet, many areas were taken without much problems. Their primitive weapons were not strong enough to do too much damage unless you were at what humans call point-blank range. In other words, if you were close enough to strike one, then their weapons would have enough power behind them to actually puncture through the carapace and do serious damage. So ambush tactics were common. However, it was also common that the insectoid species would lay their webbing around and simply capture the humans. The adhesive properties of these webbing would simply snag a human, and whatever implement they used to try to cut themselves free would simply get caught in the adhesive properties as well. Once caught, it was almost impossible for the humans to break free. At least, that's what they thought at first. The areas that they landed were not exactly heavily populated. However, they did have a high amount of foliage, which allowed the insects to traverse the area without much problems, where humans would have a little bit more difficulty even on their own planet. It was not until they started moving across to the upper hemispheres that they realized they were going to be facing some heavier resistance. The weapons used in the upper hemispheres were far more potent, and the aircraft that the insectoids didn't have much of a counter from were rather deadly. However, they did run out of ordnance very quickly, and they found that their webbing could actually catch many of these projectiles before they even struck the ground, regardless of whether the engines had turned off or not. However, there was something that the humans noticed. When these projectiles, these what they would call missiles, were caught in the webbing, and the engine was still running, it would burn the webbing, snapping it instantly, in fact, catching it on fire. And that's when they realized that their greatest ally was something that they had at their disposal since their own primordial period: fire. In realization that their webbing was no longer nearly as effective and their tactics were already being countered by the humans, it was realized that the insectoids needed to move fast if they wanted to secure the entire planet. So they tripled their efforts and moved forward in a mad rush as they moved up closer and closer to the population centers in the northern hemispheres, and that is when they realized they might have done something really stupid. As it turned out, those in the upper hemisphere, many of them can't be caught by the webbing. Many of them carry small devices that create a quick flame. Normally, this is used to catch a sort of carcinogenic on fire and breathe in the smoke. Why? Most of the other species have not figured out why. However, this small device was enough to get them away from the webbing if they did step on it or get their arms caught in it. This made the insectoids realize that they could not just simply wait for their prey to get tired and then have an easy lunch. Instead, they had to make a mad rush, and that is when they would get close, and the weapons that were being used were altered a bit. The projectiles that were being fired had a type of coating on them. As it turned out, it was magnesium. Magnesium burning somewhere around 9,000 degrees Fahrenheit was enough to get in the insectoids and burn them from the inside, in many cases causing them to catch fire on their internals and burst into flames, screaming as they basically exploded across their own webbing, spreading the fire even further and further and catching even more of it. With this, the humans began to push harder and harder against their insectoid overlords and oppressors as they began to fire back with everything, and then they began to unleash something that the insectoids would learn to fear the name of forever. This came in the form of small jars initially, as the humans would run up and throw these into the trees, and they would splat across the ground, sometimes not lighting at first, but simply catching a single spark was enough to set them ablaze with a flame that could not be put out. Then containers would drop from the sky from aircraft and splash across the ground. These were immediately set alight as they spread fire across all the webbing, chasing the insectoids back into their nests, but the nests were made from the same webbing, and they began to simply cook inside their own homes. And even worse, when all seemed to be put on one advance, the humans unleashed another device. This one did not use a chemical reaction, but instead used an atomic reaction, and it set the entire area alight in a matter of a moment. The entire invasion force was captured or killed in less than a single solar rotation of the planet. Once they had figured out that fire was their main ally, everything the humans built from then on out as far as offensive weaponry was fire. They dusted off old weapons where they would carry chemicals on their back and spray this heavy induced plasma that turned into a huge flame as they would rip through an entire nest, an entire swarm, just spraying left and right as every single one of the insectoids would run away as fast as they could. They would fly if they could, but even the ships would not get close to come and pick them up. The ships, being organic, realized how dangerous the fire was, and then if they did try to enter the atmosphere, the humans would then fire these weapons into them and set them alight as well. It became a common sight to hear this unbelievable, deep, guttural scream that came out of the ships as they began to tear themselves apart trying to put the fire out. A fire that would just not go out no matter what they did. Other chemicals were used, something called white phosphorus. As soon as they heard Willie P., everyone would simply run away as fast as they could because they did not want to be anywhere close to it. The humans, once securing their planet, reverse engineered whatever they could possibly find and began to head out to the stars. With every new species they found, they realized that again their very best weapon against them was fire. Even in space, someplace where you don't want anything to burn, their ships were loaded with anything that would burn. If this was a chemical reaction, an atomic reaction, or anything down to the molecular level, it would burn, and they would use this against their would-be enemies, as the insectoids turned out to be a semi-hive mind, and it simply called for reinforcements. The humans stretched out beyond their planet to their satellite Luna, and then eventually to its two sister planets, leading the way with a string of fire that they would either burn everything off or glass the planet, as they would say. The word got back to all the other species that if they messed with humans, they would burn. Other species believe this to be a rather tongue-in-cheek joke, as the idea that they would send you to hell would be just a common phrase for any military. It doesn't matter what type of species you are. But no, the insectoids insisted that they would literally burn. It wasn't till a semi-aquatic species decided to attack that they realized that these humans, if they wanted to burn you, it did not matter if your ships were full of water. They would boil you alive inside if necessary. The idea that they would spray that white phosphorus across anytime someone surfaced, and yet even though these aquatic species would dive into the water, it would continue to burn through their skin. If any of them got on one of their appendages, it would burn through the appendage, and that appendage would fall off from being quite literally burned through. The simple, what a human calls grenade, incendiary grenade, would be dropped in the water and raise the temperature so much that the aquatic species had to get out for fear of being cooked inside their own habitat. The humans continued to use fire against them until they retreated away, and the humans told them, with no uncertain terms, to stay away. The humans became exceedingly xenophobic on this matter, and they would immediately burn anyone who came close. They would warn you one time, and then they would set your ship alight. Only one other time has a species even dared to invade the Sol sector. They tried to be stealthy, and they set up military bases and hasty shipyards on the 7th planet from the star. It wasn't too long before the humans had noticed this and sent their own battle fleet towards them. In the records, it was shown that the humans had actually told them to leave or else, but these lizard-based aliens did not care. They believed that their hides were too strong for anything to actually hurt them, and the humans didn't say anything else. Instead, they simply fired as much weapons as they could into the surrounding battle group that the lizards had brought. They thought that the humans would come at them and try to burn their ships, but who the hell tries to burn anything without an atmosphere? Some of the penetrating missiles got through and, of course, lit the vehicles afire, but these were not organically based machines, and the fire was simply vented. Instead, the humans turned and used something no one expected. They used solid projectiles. These gauze rifle rounds, as they called them, would pierce through the ship from stem to stern, and as soon as it punctured the engines would shut down. If they wouldn't explode, then they would shut down due to safety, which left them prey for the humans to actually get close and board them. The humans then actually landed ships at the base and began to punch through the sides of the walls. They would have to do this by landing their ships next to the base and then using some sort of umbilical to cut a large hole into the wall and then knocking it aside. On the other side of the wall would always be these lizards getting ready to fire with their version of their projectile weapons. But as soon as that piece of metal came down, what filled the air was something that they did not expect, and they would forever fear the word napalm. Not only did it burn up the aliens on the other side, but the humans wore entire encompassing suits to not only shield them from the heat, but also to make sure they can breathe as the fire began to suck all the oxygen out of the air. The recycling could not keep up at all, and before the humans even reached the central comm area, the aliens had all suffocated. It was at this point that the humans sent out a message to their own fleet. Mission successful. We have successfully burned Uranus. Without skipping a beat, they sent the video feed of the aliens suffocated on the ground. Another soldier chimed in. Not all of them burned. The rest of them choked on Uranus. To this day, it is a running human gag. However, what's even worse is as the humans have begun to stretch out, if they come across another alien and have to take down one of their bases, the war cry that is heard around you as they set fire to everything you have, you will hear the humans chant in delight as they scream out, "The roof, the roof, the roof is on fire. We don't need no water. Let that motherfucker burn. Burn, you motherfuckers. Burn!"